welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you've stayed to the end of the conference, to what I hope will be the highlight of it. I'm Edward Lucas, and I'm actually here in my non-political capacity, although I am the prospective parliamentary candidate for this very part of London, running on an anti-kleptocracy ticket with the help of my friends in the Liberal Democrats in what I hope will be a general election that will give me enough time to get going. But I'm also a Times columnist and a long-standing campaigner against slaps, not least because I had to organise the Economist defence in one about 10 years ago when I worked for the Economist, which was one of the most stressful and frightening experiences of my life. I'm here with Clare Rewcastle, who is the author of these two fantastic books, and if you haven't bought them, they make wonderful Christmas presents. I've read both. This is the sort of, if you like, the GCSE version, and this is the PhD version. But they're both fantastic. And at the end of the evening, we're going to award each of these signed copies to two people who've worked very hard on the cause, and we want to show our appreciation to them. So don't leave early, because it could be you. And we're also joined by Paul Radu, who I hope is somewhere on the live stream. You there, Paul? Yes, hello, Paul from the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. We're so grateful to have you with us, Paul. Good evening. Claire and I are going to chat for a bit with Paul as well on the shape of the problem and some of the solutions, and then we're going to look forward to a lot of interaction from the floor. And in order that the live stream audience, to which welcome, thank you for joining us, can hear, if you do want to say anything, please seize that microphone and make your point through the microphone, because otherwise the numerous libel lawyers who are sitting there at £500 an hour hoping we're going to say something libelous won't be able to hear us, but neither will our friends and allies. And a special message to our friends from the kleptocracy and reputation laundering world: if you think you're going to get a lawsuit out of anything tonight, you've picked the wrong people. We are your worst nightmare. And good evening, and we welcome you in a spirit of comradeship. And if you ever choose to switch sides, please contact us privately and we'll arrange the special deluxe whistleblowing package. I also want to give a big shout out to my friend Catherine Belton. Catherine, just stand up for a moment. When you finished buying and reading Wolf, Catcher and Sarawak Report, buy Catherine's book, Putin's People, which I can say is the best account of the genesis and modus operandi of the Putin regime, and the fact that they're trying to sue her and her publishers into oblivion is a sign of just how right she was. And Catherine, it's an honour to have you here, and we're all, I was going to say, we've got your back, that's what the Americans would say. So that's the end of the happy, nice bit, and now we're going to get on to the more difficult bit, which is the shape of the problem and how to deal with it. Claire, you've been here all day and you've listened to what you said was many fantastic presentations and discussions. And I thought I'd start off with someone who knows this space really well. What were the most striking bits of the conference today? What really chimed with you?
Well, it was wonderful to hear people who are much more articulate than me explaining what the problem is, and it related to everything I've been through as a journalist under attack from this whole system of slap. Any journalist who's annoyed, powerful, wealthy people realize it's not just the legal pushback that you get, but this is part of the armory, and that was one of the first things that was discussed. So you've not probably got a guy outside your door, turning his engine and trying to look as menacing as possible. You're not just being hacked. You're not just being pursued by corporate investigators or massively defamed by the people who are saying you're defaming them. You have these even more lethal creatures, reputation lawyers after you, who have the ability to financially destroy you, put your family out on the street, not by winning a case, not by being raised, not by being raped, but simply by bullying and harassing you, should you engage with them. I've had so much of that, and it's not just the aggressive, vicious letters that you're told you can't tell anybody about because it's all private and confidential. I'm a bit naughty on that one because I didn't ask to get a threatening letter or promise to keep it confidential. But there's a lot of that, obviously, that goes on that can be terrifying to journalists. But then when you do start to engage with these guys because you're forced to, by a writ, for example. Rupert Cooper-Carles is here, who's defended me through one of these cases. You find yourself in what is deliberately an massively expensive process. And that's what's been discussed today, the way that effectively you're dealing with you're dealing with wealth, and this is a wonderful tool for them. So, I found myself, often you're being sued, not by the person who's really after you, but as in the case that I've just referred to, by someone who's really effectively acting as a cat's paw on their behalf. And often it'll be a really constructed case. I mean, I had a foreign politician who was after me, didn't speak very good English, hardly any English at all, had no recognition here, was not mentioned in the article that he accused me of inferring referred to him. And he came to Carter Ruck, lawyers here in London, who constructed this wonderful sort of argument that I must have been seeking to defame this person. You then set off on this kind of Alice in Wonderland kind of path of trying to, well, in the end, prove something, as has been referred to, prove something you didn't say about someone you didn't mean. But, the one good thing about these cases dragging on forever is it gave me 2 years to find out the truth about the person I didn't mention, and to start putting a bit of pressure back on them. And as has been described in other cases, he thought the better of, eventually, of taking this to full trial, and paid at least a substantial portion, but not enough to save me financially of my costs in order to drop the case. And then the spurious slap nature comes out when this him then explaining to the press, the media in his own country, why he'd brought this case, told the press, oh well, I mean the election's over now. It was only for electoral purposes, and for the party that I was carrying on this case, and that's over now. So why should I continue the case? Therefore, I don't care about my reputation in the UK after all. So all this is very galling. And what was also equally galling was, the information I was getting from people who were talking to me, who were on the inside of this case, who had told me that the litigant was annoyed because the lawyers concerned had inferred to them that it would only cost a couple of £100,000 in legal costs to the litigant before someone of my means caved and gave in, and then they could get me to settle and achieve their political end, which would have been to have got me to issue some kind of apology that would have enabled them to tar me as a liar, and then go into the election saying that the 1MDB case, which was a massive scandal in Malaysia, was all untrue because I was a lying journalist.
So that's all good then. Thank you very much, Claire. I want to drill down into a lot of the specifics about this, because there's, in a way, the problem has got three halves. There is and you can tell I'm going to politics. I think there are three halves. That there's the nature of the law, and whether the law itself is unfair. There's the cost of the law, and then there's the way that this sort of industry is generated, has grown up, which has such a disproportionate tilt towards the interests of people who are trying to do us and the rule of law on the planet harm. But I want to go to Paul. Let's test the technology and see. Paul, I don't know whether you were able to hear any of that. I'm always very nervous with live streams, and it may be that you haven't been able to hear, but I'd love you to come in and compliment. You can compliment and complement what Claire has said, but give us an idea of what it's like from the point of view of your project, trying to run heavy lift international anti-corruption investigations in the shadow of English and indeed other countries' libel law.
I did hear very well, Lucas, and thank you very much.
Wait a moment,
for
we can't
the
hear
invitation
you. I knew this would happen.
Oh, I will.
Are you on mute?
I'm not on mute now.
Okay. Well, I was afraid that was going to happen, and we'll try again in a couple of a couple of minutes.
Is it working now?
I hear raised voices off stage, which means someone's got to press a button somewhere. Susan, is it okay now? Try again, Paul. Everyone's giving me thumbs up, but can you speak?
I'm trying to speak.
Yes!
I'm speaking.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Right. Did you hear my question?
I did hear the question, and I did hear Claire. And I think this is an amazing meeting overall. I think all the discussions that were mentioned right now were, on point, and they align exactly with what I've been through, what OCCRP, our network of investigative reporters going after the corrupt and organized crime has been against. So I think, as Claire said, this is a package, right? And as it was mentioned here in this conference, and SLAPs are one important part of this arsenal where the rich and powerful go against journalists who want to expose their wrongdoing. I also think in the case of OCCRP, what I'm seeing, and I suppose is the same in the case of Sarawak Report and others, is that with SLAPs are also about future work, because the more we work on a theme, on a subject, the better we get. And I believe the people behind SLAPs, are trying to interfere with future work. This does work to some extent, because you get yourself really busy with defending and all. But as Claire said, and we did the same at OCCRP with our cases, our main weapon when we're slapped with a slap is that we keep on investigating. We keep on doing that future work, and we keep on building on our previous experiences, because again, this is what these people want stopped. They don't want you to be able to focus. That's one thing. The other thing is we're having quite a few slaps, ongoing slaps, as I'm speaking now, and what we're seeing is strategy that goes beyond reputation management companies and the deeds that happen in London, let's say. They go across countries, across territories. When you work in a network, in an investigative reporting network, you know that your reporters are exposed in a number of countries. You also know that you're sued in London by a politician from Azerbaijan, while you have reporters back in Azerbaijan that are, get more and more afraid to do their work because of these type of pressures. Now, luckily, in the case of OCCRP, amazing journalists like Khadija Ismailova are working in Azerbaijan, and they've been to jail. They've been, targeted with spyware. They've been there. They've been sued. They've been, abused. So, and they are strong. So this is what we're relying on. Is really strong people on the ground, and people where we build the confidence together, the trust together. You gotta have, in a network, you gotta have, as you said, Edward, you gotta have the back of the people. The people should know that you're there to help them, and sometimes ask questions later. You have to be very swift, very quick in defending journalists who are part of a network and who are subjected to harassment, including slaps, because otherwise the people attacking you and attacking your reporters and your editors and your everybody will get emboldened and will go, and I mean, if you think about Daphne Caruana Galizia, imagine if she would have benefited, while being subjected to so many legal threats, if she would have benefited from a support network like the one that you're building right now. Maybe, things would have been different. Now, we have to learn from that. And, organized crime, corrupt politicians are always building their coalitions. We don't always see them, but they build their coalitions. And with the help of the criminal services industry, they're building more and more efficient safety and security packages that work to their favor. So it's really important when we try to defend against slaps and against all this arsenal that's pitted against us, to build coherent strategies that go, across digital security, physical security, lawyers, of course, defending you in court, also strategies around data. I mean, one of the main points with my court case in London was that I had to go through this tedious process of e-discovery. I had to give up my data in my laptop, in my phone, for a third-party company to go, through it. And, for an investigative reporter, data is sacred. We don't want to expose sources. We don't want to expose anyone to harm. So giving your data away to a third-party company that's going to go through the data, and search for these keywords that are provided by the other party is highly, highly damaging. And just imagine this type of service providers getting hacked at some point in time. There are many, many issues at stake there. And it's really about investigative reporting being able to carry out and to expose the powerful and their wrongdoing.
Thank you, Paul. So I think I want to take these three different aspects in turn. I think there's the changing the law. How do we need to change the law? There's the raising the money, so that it's a bit like in Crocodile Dundee in New York, if you remember, where some guy tries to mug him with a knife, and he says, "That's a knife. I've got a knife." Produce a much, much bigger knife. And if the complainants see that you're backed with such a financial war chest that you won't be intimidated, then that really blunts one of their most effective weapons. And then the third question is how we break the business model. How do we make this an unattractive business model for the reputation launderers and what you so beautifully described as the criminal services industry? So I think we might start off on the legal side. And I think, as everybody in this room knows, in English libel law, the burden of proof is to some extent reversed, that they just have to show it's defamatory, which is quite easy, and then you have to show that it's either privileged or true, or your honest opinion. And I was wondering, was there anything on if going back over your fantastic odyssey of the last how many years has it been? 15, 20, 30?
In this particular, about a decade.
Just sticking to the legal side for a moment, what were the particular points where you thought, gosh, the law is really unfair, as opposed to the financial war chest or the fact that there was this industry against you?
Well, there was a small defining moment when my kind lawyers looked at the case and came back and said, well, clearly you're entirely in the right, but they have all the money, so you're in the vulnerable position. That's the way it's stacked up. So that can't be right, can it? But so I think we need to pop that balloon.
Yes.
And we need to find ways to do it, and to prevent a situation. For example, in the particular case I was talking about early on, we had an application to look at just whether I was really referring to this guy. That was just because I wasn't. We could have thrown out the case at an early, far less expensive stage. The judge went, it's very interesting. This one could go up to the Supreme Court, actually.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it's just a point of interest for him. It's disaster for the small person who's got a very strong point. And he then turned to the litigants and said, would you appeal if I found in favour of her and chucked out the case because it doesn't really refer to you? And he said, of course we would. And he turned, he said, to me, the defendant, it's going to end up more expensive that way. You might as well just go through with it.
Yes. So
the whole system is skewed up, and it's the whole thing's an industry, and no one's really thinking about whether it's fair or not.
So about 10 years ago, I was part of a campaign which is now, I think, almost forgotten, to try and change libel law. And we did make some what we thought at the time were sort of groundbreaking changes, bringing in the honest opinion defence, which replaced the old fair comment. I think it was the other way around. I don't know if there are any lawyers in the audience who want to jump in on this point. Is there anything if one was coming back, and I know you've had, Catherine, problems with data protection, and there was this idea that collecting data on people is a breach of GDPR, and to me that's what journalism is. It's collecting data on people, and I don't see why I should have to abide by data protection rules when I'm doing my job. But I don't know. Is anyone? Do you want to have? You've got any thoughts on that? Yes. Grab the microphone. if we had the Justice Ministry and DCMS and indeed the Prime Minister all in the room here, and we're telling them this is what you need to do to fix the law purely in terms of burden of proof and things like that, is there anything that stands out as a real legal snag? Well,
the Rupert Cooper-Coles from RPC. I'm working one of the. I'm a media defence lawyer, so we we never act against the media. So we see a lot of claims, both credible, sensible claims from people who have good cases, and very abusive claims from people with either tenuous links to this jurisdiction or who don't even explain why the allegations they're complaining about are false, just come in hard with very expensive litigation. To answer your first question, the libel reform movement did, I think, achieve a lot, but I think it took what felt like Edwardian, almost Victorian libel laws, where you could get a claim off the ground very, very easily, and over real trivialities, and brought in particular the serious harm threshold, which, following some back and forth and eventually taking that to the Supreme Court, has made a big difference, where you actually need to show evidence of real serious harm, and serious financial loss in the case of companies. The difficulty with that is that takes away trivial complaints, but when you're reporting on real public interest journalism, on allegations of corruption, on dirty money flows around the world, you're not going to. You're in territory where the court is maybe not in the case of a company, but it's often going to just infer serious harm or not take much persuading that threshold's been met. The other area which I'm particularly concerned about, which you touched on, is increasing use of data protection laws. And my personal view is that they don't currently have the protections and safeguards which we've built into our defamation legislation. So wealthy individuals with a 6-year limitation period rather than a 1-year limitation period are, rather than saying you've defamed me, are saying you're processing inaccurate personal data about me, and it really comes to the same. Has the same impact, except it's even harder to defend because you don't have a public interest defence. You don't have the old Reynolds responsible journalism equivalent to protect you. So there is a journalism exemption. It's being, but it's looking sort of narrower and narrower by the day, and it's not a comfortable exemption to rely on.
Well, thanks, Rupert. I think that's really interesting. So from a campaigning point of view, what we need is to beef up the journalism exemption in data protection. I'm also very troubled, Paul, by what you said about e-discovery. Did you have any did you have any things? Tell us what they were the snooping they tried to do with your reporting.
Well, there's two things. I mean, obviously there is the e-discovery, and I've been through all of that, and it's extremely nerve-wracking. But yes, I mean, I've been hacked. That's a different form of attack, and of course, proving that the people who are attacking you are the same as those who are litigating against you is a whole different world. But one knows who's one's irritated.
Yes.
These attacks are coming from the same place in general.
Yeah, but I think the point that really stands out here is that the most terrifying thing as a journalist is when a lawyer's eyes light up and they say, "That's quite an interesting point." And you just think, golly, that was just my libel insurance I heard flushing down the toilet. And I think that we need a way of dealing with defamation lawsuits that's like a kind of small claims court, something that's very, very quick and very easy, where you're talking hundreds of pounds rather than thousands, where you don't necessarily need full-scale legal reputation, and where a judge pretty early on can say whether this is actually a serious thing that needs to go for a serious trial, or whether it's essentially a slap or vexatious. And in the reform proposals I've been working on, the idea is that if you've lost in round one, there's a huge threshold to overcome to appeal and get into round two. It has to be really an enormous mistake for you to have any chance in round two. And that would mean that we would be dealing with most slaps would be about as irritating as sort of parking and road traffic accidents.
And the other point, from the other side, that would be good is that it would actually make this accessible to ordinary people. I mean, all these laws are supposed to be, in defence of all of us, and in fact, they're only accessible and usable for the super rich.
So if we get libelled and someone says that, Claire, you're only doing this because you're working for the Malaysian opposition, which is entirely defamatory. You don't have the money to go to Shillings and say, let me, or indeed any other law firm, and Shillings are extremely respectable. And if I was libelled, I would certainly want Shillings representing me if I could afford it. So if you're watching Shillings, please write all that down. I'll say it again at the end.
Well, actually, Fanny, you should mention that, because Shillings actually did say that once to me when I was genuinely libelled. You can't afford us. so exactly, it would be very nice to, if you really want vindication of your reputation, it doesn't need to be in a fancy high court. I'm just as happy with a ruling anywhere.
Yes. Paul, do you want to come in on this? And one of the things that strikes me is the danger of forum shopping, which the libel reform in Britain was very good at. We had previously the ridiculous spectacle of a Ukrainian oligarch suing a Ukrainian journalist in a court in London for something that had been downloaded by about 3 people, published only in Ukrainian. And in the Ehrenfeld case, there was a book that wasn't even published in Britain, and she was sued in London and lost. But and that at least has been sort of largely nailed. At least I think it has. I'd be interested to hear what you say. But our friend Oliver Bullough is being sued in Portugal, a country which he has never visited, a language in which his book has not come out, by an Angolan plaintiff. And he's sitting there with Google Translate, going through lots of legal documents in Portuguese, trying to work out if he needs a Portuguese lawyer, which can't be right. Paul, how does all that strike you? Come on, please, can we sort this out? Sorry, wait a moment. I'm going to get a thumbs up in a moment, then you can try again. No, it's still not working. Wait a moment. I've had enough of these calls to last the rest of my life. Paul, you are muted, apparently. Can you just check?
I'm not.
Yes, we can hear. We can hear you now. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we do have quite a bit of experience when it comes to cross-border lawsuits. We've been sued, I think it was 10 years ago, the first time in 3 jurisdictions by the same people at the same time. So this is forum shopping and multiple jurisdiction kind of shopping. It's real, and it's dangerous. For instance, my experience with British courts was that I had to come into a legal system that I only knew from my readings of Charles Dickens, and be really prepared and undergo training, to learn how to behave in British courts. And one of the inflection points with that was when I understood how much rhetoric plays a role in these courts as opposed to actual data. These are issues that are very complex, and very few judges understand, for instance, money laundering and the complexities of cross-border money laundering. So it really, unfortunately, some of these cases come down to local influences that these people can go for through really good lawyers, and this is not right. This is something that, again, it's where you feel as a journalist, you feel betrayed, because even if you share with your lawyers, and I had the luck to be represented by amazing lawyers that worked with us at OCCRP, that we presented them, we introduced them to all the data, and this is very complex data, banking statements from many countries, and how these banking transactions went from this place to another place, and so on and so on, and they were able to understand all that. But judges in many countries don't understand these sort of issues. So if you're sued for something that's very complex that you worked, for years on, there's a chance there that you lose because of the lack of understanding from the point of view of the jurisdiction. Especially, I know about Oliver's court case in Portugal. That is something to be taken very, very seriously by everybody, because the EU is becoming such a huge SLAPP territory, and it's really, really, really something that's gonna deter investigative reporters and writers, from publishing books, from doing work. And when these attacks use EU and UK territory, from working in the favor of oligarchs from Africa or from Russia or from Asia, this is really something that's wrong, because we're just giving those people more playground, and we're really working against the public interest ourselves.
And has there anyone tried to take this up in the European Parliament, for example? Because it seems to me that that this is something where the EU could have obviously, it's a national jurisdiction case of defamation, but it might help if the Parliament or the Commission was pushing at this. Do you know any efforts in that respect?
I do.
Oh, someone does. Someone knows. An expert. Hang on, Paul. Wait a minute. Stand up. Take there's a microphone, and if you take your mask off, that'll help us hear you. Thank you. And introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Sarah Clark, and I lead the Europe and Central Asia team for Article 19, and a large coalition of NGOs, many of whom are here, have been working towards an EU directive on an anti-SLAPP directive. And that work began after Daphne Caruana Galizia was assassinated. And a number of MEPs first tabled a resolution for an anti-SLAPP directive. And in the last 3 years, we've been working with the Commission and the leadership of Vera Jourova in a big way towards an anti-SLAPP directive, and they've already just proposed measures. So,
what's in them?
Well, the good part of the measures is that we'll see measures introduced to tackle transnational or cross-border cases. What we're pushing for is for the Commission's measures to go further than that, and to really tackle SLAPPs at the national level, because our research across Europe has shown that the vast majority of SLAPPs actually take place at the national level. While a lot of them do take place out of London, and the vast majority of cross-border cases are instituted here in London, but also in Paris and in Brussels, the majority are at the national level. And so while there is a big question around competency, the Commission doesn't want to prescribe to national governments on what they can and cannot regulate when it comes to their own national laws. We're really asking them to use this opportunity, because it's a really unique moment in the legislative history of Europe, to really institute measures whereby national governments will also have to tackle SLAPPs domestically. And as always, we're pushing them to decriminalise defamation, because we see criminal and civil cases taken together all the time in places like Poland as a strategy to silence what remains of the independent media there.
Yes, and of course, don't sit down, because I've got a question for you. But I still remember the days when we had criminal libel in this country, and Jimmy Goldsmith was trying to use it to silence private eye. Sorry to put you on the spot, but it also strikes me the Council of Europe might have a role here because of the European Court of Human Rights, he says, expecting the answer yes. Please go ahead.
So we're also pushing the Council of Europe to have a self-standing recommendation against SLAPPs, which would obviously then cover all of the Council of Europe region. And we have, while we haven't had a definitive commitment, we are very optimistic that in the months ahead we will see a Council of Europe recommendation begin to be drafted. So that's out of the a number of different very long acronym committees. But we see that this is a real moment there's just a lot of momentum to tackle this issue. So we're really trying to seize that.
Well, this is great, and Britain, of course, is still part of the Council
Indeed.
of Europe, although temporarily out of the EU, at least I hope temporarily. We will, but this is something that we can ask the government and our MPs, the members of the Parliamentary Assembly, to push on.
Yes, and just to kind of mention, we've drafted. I mean, I'm saying this from our perspective, but there's so many of the NGOs we've been working with in the room. We drafted an EU model anti-SLAPP directive. So in there are all of the measures that we'd like to see, in particular things like early dismissal of cases. I mean, that's kind of the critical issue. But also, some punitive action against repeat offenders and repeat plaintiffs. And also then, soft measures like the real need for funding for journalists who are defending these cases.
Right.
Thanks.
Well, I want to turn on to funding next, because this is I think is the absolutely key thing, that if you've got enough money on your side, everything else is broadly secondary. Claire, tell us did you ever work out what the sort of budgets were of the people arrayed against you, and how much did it cost you personally to win in the end?
It cost me my pension, which I had to cash in, and I got some of it back. I'm not, I'm just a journalist, but it cost me tens of thousands of pounds, and I got off very lightly thanks to, a very magnanimous law firm that supported me, much less expensively than, that is usually the case. And yes, it all boils down to money, and I think, the legal profession needs a higher burden on it. In terms of who they are taking on. Interesting to me to hear today that the number of billionaires has gone up from about 140 in recent years to over 3,000. And, I look into these reputation lawyers, as they so often write to me, and then I peruse their websites, and you see more and more a frankly disgusting approach to their work. They are going after this money. They have whole divisions devoted to this ultra high net worth individual that they pander to, and they slavish. I mean, it's really quite revolting how they seek to earn their money from these people, not just as lawyers. I mean, they sort of, they're so desperate to get this billionaire cash coming in that these so-called law firms are willing to run their kids to school. I saw in one case. There's nothing they'll not do. I mean, they even, one of them, Mishcon de Rea, at one point teamed up with Tim Elliott's quintessentially, to sort out your social life, while we're lawyering for you.
I should just like to say that Mishcon de Rea is an extremely reputable forum, and if I ever needed legal services and for any reason couldn't get shillings, I'd certainly want to go to Mishcon de Rea, and nothing that has been said in the course of the evening in any way reflects any criticism at all of the probity, individual or collective, of Mishcon de Rea. And I have to write that down as well, and I'm sure you agree, Claire.
They can take me to court for being nasty about them.
The irony alert. There's a wonderful idea that you should have a typeface called ironics, which would show when you're speaking with a double meaning, and I just wish there was a verbal version of ironics as well.
Anyway, like banks, I think that these law firms ought to be forced to have a far higher bar when they take on such clients.
I want to get onto the business model later, but I want to just stick with the money for the moment. Paul, can you let's see if you take yourself off mute, and we'll hope that the buttons work here. Just tell us about how much it costs for you what you have to spend in legal fees, and what sort of financial firepower is directed against you.
It's very costly. Just the e-discovery that we had to undergo was above $50,000. So imagine you pay for your data to be taken from your devices and you pay a lot of money. This was hundreds of thousands of pounds that we had to spend, and we had pro bono and low bono lawyers. It's a huge financial burden. If not for the Press Freedom Defense Fund, if not for OCCRP and our strategy to always have, some money at hand to defend in such cases, if not for the Cyrus Vance Center for International Justice in New York, we wouldn't have been able to defend in this case. This is, again, it's very costly. And when you have a network and you have a few of these cases running in parallel, this is huge. It can dry down your funding, and it can scare away your funders as well. So for this, we're working together with many other organizations, some of them in this room here with you, towards building a legal defense fund, towards building something that would really scare off the people who want to sue you.
And I think that's really a really important thing. There was, I don't know how well known this is, that there was a case a few years ago of someone who was writing a book and couldn't get anyone to publish it because of the legal fees. And John le Carre, David Cornwall, just gave this author a blank check and said, show this to any publisher, I'm good for whatever it costs. And that was just so impressive. This was a man who literally didn't care. 1 million, 10 million, 20 million, doesn't matter. It's just, it's the film rights for just one of his books. And it was so useful to have for the author to have that in his or her back pocket. And the book in the end did come out, and the person concerned never sued because they realised there was no point, as their case would have been very weak, and their only real weapon was financial intimidation. And so I think that we need an enormous legal defence fund, backed, I would argue, by I know George Soros is controversial in some countries, but I would say if you could get the more rich backers are behind it, both philanthropic and indeed public or whatever, the less likely it is that any of their money is actually going to be used. The question is how one ensures that it's not invoked frivolously or maliciously. And I believe the EU has actually set up some sort of fund. Paul, go ahead.
Actually, the US just set up a fund, a legal fund to defend journalists. I think Samantha Power advertised it not long ago, a few weeks back. But it's very important, besides the money for the legal fund, to create a strategy around the fund that doesn't just regard litigation, but all the other things that were mentioned here. The fact that these same people or the people behind them will hire companies like NSO Group to put some spyware over your devices, that they will physically surveil you, that they will try to harm you and build compromise on you, that they will use all sorts of smear campaigns over social networks. So I think this needs to be thought in this kind of broader context to come up with something that's meaningful, because if we build this defense fund, it's great, but people will just stop suing and start killing more.
Yes. Well, I think this soft target protection is a really big, my other world of dealing with against hybrid warfare, there's such a gulf between the sort of protection you get if you work for a government, and you instantly, if you're being harassed or there's a mysterious break-in or something, the entire machinery of the state is brought behind you because you're one of theirs. And if you're a campaigner or an NGO or a journalist or even an academic or anyone like that, and you're being intimidated by the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department or by the Kremlin or anyone else, you go down to the police station and say, I think I'm being harassed by the Chinese Communist Party, and they look at you and think, go and sit in the corner till you feel better. And so we need ways in which we can, if you have these people sitting outside your house with the engine running, trying to intimidate you, that there's someone you can call, there's something you can do. And what was your experience, Claire, when you were being intimidated? Did any bit of the British state show any interest at all in your plight?
Well, I at one point I thought I really had to take myself down to the police station, so I did. And when I finally got to the top of the queue and explained this Malaysian situation that I had to a sort of baffled policewoman, she finally said to me, well, look, you're a journalist, isn't that what you signed up for? Which I guess, was about as, there is that sort of attitude and problem that journalists face. So no, you don't get much support.
I had a death threat from Latvia, and the Latvian police were absolutely brilliant and tracked the guy down. It was from a Latvian phone number, which wasn't terribly clever of him. They said we can either prosecute him or get him to apologise. And I thought it'd be much funnier to have the apology. So I got this apology where he said, when I said I wanted to kill you and your family, I meant it only in the catches the shutka, with the meaning of a joke. So I thought that was quite good. But I just wish other countries' police forces would do that. So financial firepower is very important. There's a question there. Yes, go ahead, ma'am. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Jeanette from Media Defence, and just on that point of this not only financial backing but seeking prosecution, so we as an NGO do, as many other NGOs in the room do, we will provide financial support, legal support for journalists who are freelance, citizen journalists, bloggers who are under threat for their reporting. And further to that, we'll also help seek prosecution when there are threats, violence, harassment, because so often you're seeing journalists not only encountering slaps, but it's part of a wider campaign where they're also facing cyber attacks and things like that. So we will help you seek prosecution in those cases. So spread the word.
Yes.
We were there.
That's fantastic.
Well,
do you have a 24-hour hotline?
If we get the funding from George Soros, then I'm sure we can do that.
Well, it's a massive deterrent. If the person who's persecuting you, who thought you were just a sort of pathetic, impoverished, individual journalist,
Don't be so hard on
realizes,
yourself,
well, if they realize or think that you're no longer going to have to worry about the finances, it's a massive deterrent. And the other deterrent, if I could just jump in, because you mentioned the Council of Europe, in my latest case, I have been hugely supported by the fact that NGOs are now clubbing together, and they came in to support me on my latest problem, which involved an arrest warrant put out against me, but also against a reputation laundering, a series of legal threats against me. And they came together and put a slap notice on the Council of Europe's platform that's been created for journalists, to protect journalists. At the time...
they were trying to sue the Council of Europe.
Someone was trying to sue me trying to threaten me in order that I would take down any mention of them as a reputation laundering exercise from my website and remove them. They were going through they had a lot of money, and they were trying to get everyone that had ever written about them to remove what had been written, or else experience very expensive action. And a whole club of NGOs, many of whom are represented in this room, got together and wrote a complaint which was placed on the Council of Europe's website for the defence of journalists. This was a massive deterrent for the person coming after me, because it showed that his action was proving counterproductive. That website, that platform, you cannot be sued for mentioning their name on it.
Yes.
And it goes on the internet forever. So they suddenly realized that, by attacking me, they were going to make a spectacle of themselves on an official platform. So it was incredibly effective.
There's a question at the back there. Go ahead.
Hello, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be one of those people that says it's not a question, it's a comment. But I just wanted to come in on Clare's point.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Oh, of course. My name is Jessica Nivonin, and I'm with Index on Censorship.
All right.
I just wanted to come in on Clare's point, because it was actually Article 19 and Index on Censorship, who are both partners of the Council of Europe Platform for the Protection of Journalists, who, as you said, Clare, with other NGOs, but since we're partners, we file the alert. And I think it's something that we actually had a meeting about on Friday, that we need to kind of put the Council of Europe platform on the map for other journalists. And so, if you're a journalist out there or in the room who is facing a slap, or in the future faces a slap, hopefully you won't, or in fact any other issue, as I said, it's any media freedom issue that journalists are faced with, please do get in contact with us, and we can discuss as well potentially filing an alert on your behalf, because as Clare's experience shows, it can have an impact. So yeah, spread the word also about that. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. It's so nice. All these people I only know from Twitter, now we're meeting face to face. It's really good. So I want to move on now to the sort of, how do we bust the business model? And clearly the way to do that is say it's counterproductive. And we've seen, we've seen this a little bit in the world of privacy with the Streisand effect, that when you try and shut something down, in fact, the Chinese have just done this with the tennis star, by trying to close the thing down, you actually make so much fuss that you make the problem far, far worse. And I think ultimately that's what we want people to think, that if I go after the journalist, whether it's with an expensive lawsuit or intimidation or malware or whatever, I'm just creating so many more problems that I would have been better off sitting on my hands and just taking the criticism, and that would undermine the whole basis of the reputation laundering industry, and all these what you beautifully described, the criminal services world, because they would who would bother? you would be seen as having damaged your reputation by taking those steps. So I think that's what I'd like to spend the next few minutes on. We can take questions from the people who are watching on the live stream. I'm not fiddling with my phone and scrolling through Twitter. I'm actually looking at the WhatsApp messages that are coming in, and we've got a couple already. But if you've got more, please send them in, and they will magically appear on our on the phone. But Paul, let's bring you in here. You mentioned already the idea that if someone sues, the key thing is to have a huge support network that piles in on that, and you get, I suppose ideally you would have journalists in 20 or 30 countries saying, hello, this Mr. Oleg Garkov, which is my name for any generic oligarch. He's an oligarch, Oleg Garkov. Oleg Garkov is kicking out, is making problems here. Let's dig into him and see what we can do, and sort of swarm him with lots and lots of coverage. But tell us, what would you ideally like to see from OCCBR's point of view?
I think one very efficient strategy against SLAPs is to tackle them head-on really early. It really comes down to answering the first letters, the first threats you're getting. So each media should ideally have, and obviously many independent media don't, but should have a strong legal department that should take on the menacing emails, and phone calls really, really early on, because this might diffuse the situation and it might get you rid of at least some of the SLAPs. Now, if this still goes to court, if they still sue you in various jurisdictions, it's crucial to arm the defense in a way that where your lawyers are educated into your work, where you sit down for hours and hours and tell them about how you reported on the issue and how that reporting is part of a larger universe. Lawyers getting educated into cross-border work is crucial to this. Writing about your experiences as an investigative reporter who was subjected to SLAPs is also very, very important. And it's always useful to send these stories out to people who want to sue you, so that they understand that you're not defenseless. The other thing is to always assess the situation around the court case, in my view, to see what are the other risks. Are there the people suing you a state kind of level power? Are they an organized crime group? What kind of levers can they pull to attack you? What other levers than the SLAP itself? You have to be obviously very, very careful about your comms, about what you tell people about the matter that you investigated, and you also have to increase the cost for the other party if you really get to court. When I'm saying this, I'm referring to the fact that by investigating, by sending questions out to other parties that have deals with the party that sued you, might increase the cost in the sense of the reputation of those people and in the sense of their future business. They won't care if you increase the cost of the court case, by 100,000 or £1 million, but they will care if their future business will be affected by what you have to present the court with, and by the pressure that you can put yourself on other parties that have deals with these people who are suing you.
Claire, I was just wondering, knowing what you know now, is there anything you wish you'd done differently over the last 10 years that would have given your persecutors a bigger headache? Had you known at the time you could do it? Well,
taking up on what Paul said actually, and what has been talked about today, maybe needing to rethink this business of coming out and shouting about the problem. It's not the advice you tend to get. If you have any legal action, the first thing you're told to do is shut up about it, which is actually playing right into the hands of the person who's trying to shut you up. And if they can stretch it out for a couple of years, all the better. So, and anyway, there's a tendency, I actually take it as a badge of honor if someone writes me a nasty letter or seeks to sue me, because that tells me I've hit a raw nerve. And they can't they can't fight back in any other way. These are all very wealthy people who have much more access than me or most people to a media platform themselves. If they were able to give a proper account of their position, they could laugh the likes of me out of court, couldn't they? I mean, in the court of the public opinion, by just actually saying the truth and explaining how I was inaccurate and lied. So if they're resorting to legal action, it's rather telling if they're massively rich and powerful. And so, I think, was mentioned by a lawyer previously today that maybe we need to just come out on this. There's a reluctance amongst journalists and their employers to talk about legal action. Actually coming out, speaking about it starts to, it's the same counterproductive effect for the person who's starting out on the action. So, I used to hold my horses and not complain, and now I've changed my position on that.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and I think Private Eye pioneered this with whenever they got a letter from entirely respectable law firms like Carter Ruck, they would use the tool of ridicule, and usually if it was labelled private and confidential, they'd print it in full with some epithet scrawled on the bottom. And this, and I think this acts as quite a deterrent. It doesn't mean they never get sued, but the kind of initially sort of these letters written at extraordinary legalese with sort of very heightened emotion. We note with consternation your contention that so-and-so, and you just print it and say, or stick it up on your website and say, let another stupid letters come in. It sort of blunts the impact, because they're aiming to intimidate, and if you show you're not scared, then they've failed to intimidate you.
Well, some of these letters, they really do get worked up, and yes, you have to laugh, so I just make fun of them.
I wonder if there's a thesaurus, a sort of legal thesaurus, where they're looking for endless synonyms for outrage, just to try and up the ante. I'm wondering also about, I think it was Bill Browder, I can't quite remember, it was someone who's quite rich who was being sued, who immediately said, well, if they try that, I'll countersue them for malicious prosecution. And I know that works in some jurisdictions, but I don't know whether anyone here has got any experience in responding by suing back. Of course, in the United States, there's Rachel's law, which is brilliant, which means if you're sued for libel in a court outside America, you can immediately sue the plaintiff inside America, and they're bound to lose. I exaggerate only slightly. Did I get Rachel's law right, Rupert? Yeah, microphone, yes.
It's called the Speech Act, and you automatically, unless the foreign libel claim would succeed in America, you automatically get a judgment equivalent to what they've got against you against them to sort of neutralize it. So, New York, it began in New York State as the Libel Terrorism Act or something.
This was because of Rachel Ehrenfeldt's book, Funding Terror. Yes,
and then it's become a federal law.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Please all join me in a rousing chorus of "God Bless America." This is just. I wish we had that here. That would. So that means you can't. So basically, you can't be sued as an American
unless your claim would succeed in America. So
yes.
They say are U.S. laws or nothing when it comes to free speech. So. Yeah, I mean that wouldn't mean so much if we had it here, of course, because the bar's a lot lower.
Yes, but still, it's nice to know. So I've got a couple of questions here and please, on the online audience, do just jump in and send your questions. So the first question is about anti-money laundering directive, such as the one that is being passed in the EU at the moment. Is that a potential space where anti-SLAPP measures can be introduced in relation to allegations of financial crime? That's from Mona Deely. I have no answer to that, except it'd be nice if it worked. I'm not sure whether you have any thoughts, Claire, or maybe Paul wants to jump in. As AML as a defence against SLAPP. Or maybe we can come to you. I see you're nodding. Would that Charlie?
Well, just as you're picking up on that, I'm aware of a law firm that has been doing work for one of the people I've been looking into, who is, of famously notorious reputation and is a fugitive from several criminal authorities. And that law firm is acting as, they've taken him on as a client. And I think the due diligence demanded of law firms should be tightened in the same way as it has been for banks.
So this might hypothetically be someone who's on the run from justice in 3 jurisdictions.
Well, it might be.
And was still able to retain a very reputable law firm.
Yes, and there are others of this ilk who's, and I have on occasion written chattily, as I know it really annoys law firms. They always get back and say, well, we don't want this interchange with you. You need to have a professional legal support. We can't just keep writing letters to you, because they want me to be bled. So I chattily told one of these law firms that, it was almost irrefutable evidence that the person who had hired them, was doing so with 1MDB stolen money. They should perhaps be concerned and aware about that. When they got back and said, our compliance department is quite comfortable with this client. Well, they shouldn't have been.
They're not exactly the princess and the pea, the compliance departments, are they? There's a question at the back. Go ahead.
Sorry, my name is Ben Caldrock from Transparency International UK. So there's a couple of money laundering laws in the UK that are relevant to this. So firstly, there's the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, which makes it a criminal offence to handle the proceeds of crime. So if your law firm and your client comes to you with a interesting reputation, let's say, and they've got bags full of cash, basically, then you should be doing due diligence on them, and you should be reporting them to the police if they have more money than they should have, essentially. You also have the anti-money laundering regulations, which are sort of a development of this. So you have to carry out due diligence on your client, you have to know their source of funds, and you have to basically be aware of your money laundering obligations. But the legal advice is a grey area on this. So if you're buying a house for them on their behalf, then you have to do those checks on them. But if you're carrying out slap suits on their behalf, then the checks are in much more of a grey area. So if we want to tighten up on this, then it's bringing that legal advice out of that grey area and saying that if you're providing legal service to someone with illicit wealth, then you have to do that due diligence. And this is a civil measure as well. So it's a lower burden of proof for regulators to go after you.
Right, that's really a good point. And there's a paradox that whereas the enormous progress that's been made in the United States on kleptocracy leaves us all in the shade, is fantastic. The big hole in the middle is the attorney-client privilege, and that American lawyers are very influential and very resistant to having any impediment to attorney-client privilege, which means that they can take on the most dodgy clients and handle their funds and do pretty much anything with them, I think. Paul, do you want to jump in on any of this? And please start sharpening some more questions.
Just one other thing that I believe might be interesting to this audience is that the sheer amount of information that should be public and is not public because of settlements that are reached by journalists with these people, with the oligarchs. I've reached myself a settlement, right? But there's so much information that doesn't get out to the public, and that information should be unlocked at some point, because this is what these people count on, the people suing you. The fact that you'll go and they will, dry you of your money, and they will spend your time. And in the end, none of it will come out because, it will be settled and it will be locked, in a vault somewhere in a court. So I think this is also something that needs to be addressed. I mean, the risk is too small for the people suing you, and they will always go for slaps because that risk is so small. But if they have something to lose, something real, that is the information that might come out during the trial, and the information, that's actually locked as a result of settlements.
Yes, it's one of the very frustrating things in this. There's also sealed arbitration judgments where you can't, you know that there's something really interesting there and you can't see it, whereas if in a real court you'll be able to. There's a question at the back. I can't see who it is, but can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's George Turner. I run an organisation called TaxWatch, but have various interests in this field. But There was actually a barrister in this country that was prosecuted for money laundering about 10 years ago. I forget her name, but essentially she was defending somebody, and it was the prosecution alleged that the money she got in order to pay for the defense, she must have known came from the proceeds of crime. And in the end, she was an Isle of Man barrister, and she was the prosecution was struck out because the judge in the summing up speech had misdirected the jury, and it was then found not in the public interest to have a retrial. But essentially, what it did show is that it is possible to prosecute lawyers.
And this is Jenny Holt case, if I remember right. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
So the law clearly is there. The case didn't show that it's not possible to do it. There was a mistake in the way that it was prosecuted. But that was just in response to that. The thing I wanted to say was actually something different, which is why all these things cost so much money. They cost so much money is because people are buying legal services and lawyers are expensive. They don't cost a lot of money because these people are litigants in person. None of these oligarchs are litigants in person. And lawyers act on a license. They practice on the basis of a license. And what we need to start thinking about doing is taking away the license. Right? At the end of the day, some of the stuff that I've received in terms of legal letters in the past are insane. Like the lawyers are making claims that they know cannot be true. The law that they are citing, they know is inaccurate. They're doing so because they think that as an unrepresented party, you don't know what you're talking about and you're just going to cave. That's dishonest. And essentially, if you're dishonest as a lawyer, you shouldn't be allowed to practice. One of our trustees is a criminal lawyer, and I've taken him to these kinds of events, and he runs a small legal aid practice dealing with road traffic offences and other good, honest criminals. And he says to me, if I behaved like this, I'd expect to have my license taken away. This is insane, like some of the stuff that's going on. If a small regional legal practice started behaving with this level of dishonesty, the SRA would come and take your practice away. Why do we not? Why are the SRA sanctioning these lawyers to behave in this way? And I think we need to turn some of the fire on the regulators to ask them why they are giving a license to print money to certain firms who are behaving in a fundamentally dishonest way.
I couldn't agree more. There seems, I don't know what regulating they're doing on this front, frankly. They should be really looking at the professional conduct of some of their lawyers. And honestly, I have been blackmailed by some of these lawyers, as Rupert knows. And we've had to remind them that they were blackmailing me. They seem to act with a sense of total impunity. They've got these incredibly powerful, wealthy clients, and they seem to think that they can say what they like. I have seen letters written about me by some of these reputation law firms to other, media they're trying to silence. Saying the most unbelievably defamatory things about me in order to obviously discredit me as a source. They do what they like.
Well, how do we puncture this climate of impunity? Because I can completely agree with you on this. It really shocks me, the sort of climate, the way in which the big barristers who should know better and solicitors who should know better, who are ultimately officers of the court, they're not businesses. They have this license, which is a judicial one, and they owe their first allegiance to the truth and to the law, not to anything else. But I think it would be really interesting to try and find some egregious examples, and then see if there's some way we could bring a legal action against them, which would ruin their day, and make them think that there is a downside to this. Because I guess that none of the people who persecute you, have presumably gone on to send their have nice houses in the country and go on holiday 3 times a year and send their children to the most expensive schools in the world and basically don't have never break a sweat about this.
Well, our friend from ABC Australia made the point that he'd written an incredibly important book about the Scientologists today, and it took him 4 years to write it, of intensive investigative work, and the lawyer who spent 3 days interrogating on the stand on a spurious case got as much in those 3 days' work as he had for the entire book and project. So I think it kind of puts it in perspective.
Yes. Well, as an author myself, I I reckon it's not even minimum wage, is it? Writing books, but it is worth it all the same. Good. Anyone else like to come in? I've got a few more thoughts, but I'd be very yes. Catherine Belton, please speak for as long as you like.
Oh, hi. I'm not speaking of my own case, but I'm really shocked to hear that you have lost your pension savings in defending yourself. And surely, I mean, given the fact that your research and your incredible investigation has led to all these kind of multiple investigations and prosecutions by the DOJ, I mean, surely there should be a media defence fund out there who is going to give you restitution and help you recoup all your losses. I'm just really think it's terrible to hear.
Well, I do like the idea of this us clubbing together to support in advance, journalists facing these problems. There's only one upside, Catherine, which is, you then end up like Gandhi. There's nothing more you can do to me. Bring it on.
Yes. No. I mean, there's. I think that the idea of, you skillfully making yourself not worth suing is one advantage. It annoys them. The trouble is they can go after publishers and news outlets, and one needs a way of constructing a legal arrangement where there's nothing at any stage to sue. But I still feel that's kind of conceding too much ground from their point of view. It should be possible to be in this business and make a profit and have a comfortable retirement rather than having to be like Gandhi. But Paul, was there anything you wanted to bring in at this stage before we move the discussion on?
Just that we really need to go on the offensive against some of these people, against some of these law firms who really just service criminals. Because my feeling was during my court case and other court cases that we have at OCCRP, that some of it was actually pushed on by the lawyers themselves, who convince oligarchs and others, to sue and to go against journalists as part of this offering, as part of this package, and obviously as part of the industry that they're building. So we've been pinned down to the wall for too long, and I think we need to come together as an industry. And we're investigating, as part of Pandora Papers and Panama Papers, all these formation agents who help people put together financial infrastructure. Why don't we investigate people who help criminals and kleptocrats put together this litigious infrastructure, this libel infrastructure that attacks journalists and stops them in their tracks?
Yeah. Well, I agree, and I think that I would love it if we could, in the literary world, there are these prizes like the Bad Sex Award for the worst writing about bedrooms, and it's a sort of kind of joke if you get this, and there's various other sort of negative awards, but I wonder if there'll be a way of giving some, they have the Legal 500, who are the world's best, or the best lawyers in London, and I'm wondering if the organisations here could get together and give the kind of...
I think they've done it.
Has it happened, really? Go ahead, yes.
Well, actually, this is thanks to Clare as well. You can go on to the Coalition Against Slaps in Europe, and you can see in our campaigns, we have an annual anti-slap awards.
Right.
We award slaps to the worst offenders, the biggest legal bullies out there. We have 5 different awards. And we ask the targets of these slaps to accept the award on behalf of the slap litigants.
That's brilliant.
And they give us a chance to have our little say.
Claire very kindly accepted the award on behalf of Carter Rupp.
Yeah,
thank you.
And have you had any legal pushback? Have you had letters saying we regard this award as defamatory?
No, we actually haven't.
Yes, I set up something called the Wolf Warrior Award, which was a weekly prize for the most obnoxious and counterproductive Chinese official behaviour each week from an embassy, and we'd find a named embassy official who'd done something really, really stupid, nasty on behalf of the Chinese state, and we'd then award them this Wolf Warrior prize in the knowledge they would then have to report to their bosses that they'd received it, and the citation was, it was written in sort of lurid prose, in the knowledge this might be not perfect from their career point of view. But we discontinued it in the end on the grounds we didn't want a sort of Darwinian pressure that they might learn from their mistakes. It was better that they should carry on making them. Good. Any more questions? Yes, Susan.
Hi, Susan Coughtrey, the Foreign Policy Centre. I amongst some of the suggestions we heard in our working group in order to bring this issue more into public attention was, why don't media publish at least a tally of the letters they receive, if not the letters themselves? And would that do something? I mean, I'm thinking particularly, Clare and Paul probably receive these fairly frequently.
Well, that's an interesting. One could have a coalition of the main news outlets who would say we all agree that any letters we receive from any lawyers about anything, we will publish. So don't think you're going to get away with that strictly private and confidential nonsense, because whatever you say is going to be on our website the moment we receive it.
Absolutely. It's. I don't know, and again, possibly this is something that Rupert, what this private and confidential, label actually means in law as an obligation on the recipient of it. It's.
Well, it depends. Sometimes they're not private at all, but often the letter's not framed as purely defamatory. It's also, as I said, data protection claim. And so, I mean, that point you're making earlier, Claire, about lawyers jumping up and down about, not talking about your case. I think we were a bit more relaxed than usual. It was only the most sort of, controversial sort of post. But ultimately, when you put something on your, if you publish that letter, that could be cited as aggravating damages. So the other side then puts that into their pleaded case and says we're entitled to more damages. And then every time you put up a new post or a new letter, they apply to amend their particulars of claim and put in further aggravating factors, all of which the court could take into account to make you pay more. So it is. I've seen that happen quite a few times. So sometimes it deters them. Sometimes the oxygen of publicity will put them off, but it's not necessarily a solution on a pure litigation perspective.
I feel bad that we're making you as the lawyer in the room. We're giving you a lot of. I know if you ever ask a lawyer for advice at a social occasion, you should expect a bill the next morning. So I'll give you my address. Catherine, go ahead.
I had a question for Paul. Actually, I was really interested to find out more about what you uncovered during the discovery process that made your litigant back off, and if any of that's become public since.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, it hasn't become public, and it can't be made public for now. That is one huge issue, and you see, that's exactly the point here. I can't talk about it because we had to settle. Otherwise, we would have gone for years of trials in London. I would have to come there very often. I would have to, we'd have to spend a lot more money than what we spent. It was, in our case, it was a favorable kind of settlement. The articles are still up, but I'm muzzled. I can't talk about the court case and about what was in that discovery. I can only say that as a journalist, it was a really heavy process to share my data with someone else. And the other party usually shares a lot less. And this is another huge issue. And even if you share everything that you have, you'll still be called a liar. It's strategy in court.
Yes, I'm wondering if there's a role for some kind of trusted third party that you wouldn't actually have to share your data with the other side, but whether we could argue that it would be a sort of a neutral and highly secure custodian who would do the searching and see if there's anything relevant, whether one can apply to the court for that. 'Cause it seems to me extraordinary that as a investor, I mean, I'd rather eat my iPhone than hand over my data. Although I realise the Chinese Communist Party has already read everything, but that's different. Go ahead, Alex.
Another question for Paul. Axel here from SVT, Swedish Television. Have you changed your strategy of how you store your data and how you keep your information for your journalist after this litigation process?
Yes, we did put clear processes in place as a result of this litigation and others before. We have clear policies on what data we delete from our systems, of when we delete. You got to be consistent with this type of policies in order to be able to go to court and say, these are my, this is my information. It doesn't go back to this year because our policy, and you show the policy that was, signed by everybody in the organization, by the directors and all. This is our policy to erase data after a while. So this is very, very important in terms of the hygiene of the communication inside the organization, is the hygiene of the communication with other organizations as well. That takes a lot from the fun of investigative reporting, unfortunately, but it's something that you need to do. And yes, you do need to have clear strategies when it comes to your data, where you keep your data, what kind of data you keep. It's really important if you're tackling a subject, in Europe, that maybe it's better to keep your data in the US. That comes with caveats, that comes with other things that are attached, but data strategies should always be designed around investigative reporting too.
That's really interesting, and you may have done this already. I would love to see a kind of toolkit for investigative reporters about what you do before you get the lawyer's letter, as well as sort of strategies for when it arrives. I think that would be a really useful part of journalist training and education. I feel we've everything's been sort of talking around your investigation, but we haven't actually talked about it. And the cover of your book is just so fantastic. The story of the have-nots and the have-yachts, the failings of globalization, and how a tiny rainforest campaign derailed the world's largest theft and brought down a government. That's just a cover. It gets better after that. But just give us the sort of latest bit of the narrative arc, because the book ends up with a lot of vindication and success, and you fight off with enormous efforts a lot of this stuff. But can you bring us up to date? Where are we now?
So nice of you to. We ended up on a relative high point, didn't we, in the book? Yeah. The deposed Prime Minister is now charging his way back towards retrieving office. If you'd, if you follow what's going on in Malaysia. And I guess as a sign of that, there was a sort of coup, a COVID coup that took place that basically was the overturning of the elected government that had come in to depose this Prime Minister. So these guys are now back in power, and one of the consequences for me is, I put a copy of the wanted notice that's now out for me in Malaysia. I'm back as a serious criminal target, as well as several, sort of
so this
civil
is up on the wall here is the wanted notice written in Malay, but I'm sure we can Google translate it. Yeah.
Well, it's a genuine wanted notice put out by the police about 10 days ago. It has a sort of a smiling shot of me, and underneath it says that they would like to know my whereabouts. Well, I think we can give the address. We're at number 67 Wimpole Street at the moment, and any evidence, any information as to I don't know what further information they want. It's all on my blog, but they want their hands on me.
Yes. And can you travel freely? Are you red noticeable?
Well, I have had a red notice against me last time round. They did try that, and again, thanks to the magnificent support of so many of the NGOs in this room we clubbed together, we were able to approach Interpol and have it dropped. And so I was very concerned, over the last month when I realised there was another criminal warrant out for me in Malaysia for alleged criminal libel, that this might rear its head again. So far, I think they have not issued a red notice, but it is a major threat for many journalists. These requests, inter-country requests, not necessarily through Interpol, can result on journalists who are wanted by a country finding themselves arrested at airports as they travel,
so you
blissfully unaware.
You think carefully about where you go on holiday?
Well, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, certainly not to Southeast Asia at the moment.
Right. Well, that's a chilling note. I'm just wondering, there's one question just came in, Paul, about insurance, litigation insurance, which I have to say, at The Economist, I was so glad we had. I've never spent other people's money as fast as I did in those months, and it was a most exhilarating experience. And what was so fantastic was that it was all very well spent. We found out fantastic stuff about the other side, which we were then, due to their very bad legal advice, able to insert into our defence at the last minute, which had catastrophic results for their plea. And the best thing was the liability insurer said, no, this is great. We will be going around asking everyone to buy our insurance, and we will cite your victory and the amount we spent on ensuring that you won as an example of why it's so good to have liability insurance with our company. So it was, everybody was happy. The more I spent, the happier they were. And it was just brilliant. And it was the only nice bit about it. But Paul, do you have liability insurance at the project? And do you think that, and if so, does it help?
We do have liability insurance at OCCRP. I should say that it would have covered, if I would have lost in London, it would have covered partially the loss. So it's not the premium that we're paying is high and is growing. This is why my co-founder, Drew Sullivan, is working towards building a global insurance fund. The idea is for journalists to be able to self-insure. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there as well towards building like really a pot of money that would deter slaps and other things like this, and that might be used towards not just legal security but other type of security that we need to do our work. So yes, insurance is very useful, but it wouldn't cover wouldn't have covered the whole cost of a court case in London.
And just getting back to where we started, insurance is only part of the wear and tear. My friend Jessica Aro in Finland, who was the first Western journalist to write about the troll factory, she got the full court press from the Russians, including messages supposedly sent from her dead father's phone, horrible stuff dug up about stuff that meant many years ago about her personal life. And she actually, even in Finland, which is supposedly a very safe country, she had to go and live sort of pretty much undercover in another country. And that mixture of psychological and legal, as well as financial support and employers standing by you and so on, we need the whole package. So I think we've come to the end. The time has passed amazingly quickly. And I want to thank Paul very much. And if there are any billionaires watching, this is a very good place to send your money. And everyone else who's watching, please buy these books, which make ideal Christmas presents. And now, as a sort of doing my Santa Claus bit, I'd like to ask Jessica and Charlie to stand up, please. Very good, Jessica and Charlie, very good. Please come up to the front, because you are the lucky winners. You may have these books already, in which case you can then give them to your friends. Please come up. Claire, will you give one copy to Jessica and one copy to Charlie? Thank you so much for your efforts today.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks, both of you, for everything. Yeah.
Good. And in the background, you can hear that's the electronic gnashing of teeth of all those people who've been paid £500 an hour to tune into this and hope you'd say something interesting, which didn't happen. I want to thank you, the members of the audience, as well, for your excellent questions. It's great seeing so many people in the flesh after so many years of it seems like years, so many months of these Zoom calls, and all your efforts in different ways are fantastic. And in a way, I take great comfort from the fact that I didn't know all these things that are going on, and I thought I followed this quite closely. But it's fantastic there are so many different efforts underway, and the more we do and the more of us that do them, the harder it will be for the bad guys. And I do think, having followed this space since I was first sued for libel back in the 1990s, I think we're actually doing far better than we were then, and the tide, if it hasn't turned, is very close to turning. So please join me finally in thanking Jessica and Paul for their contributions.